Thank you all for coming to the first live podcast recording of the Sistahs-in-Law podcast. I'm so excited to feature two women here who have been on my dream guest list for the podcast. So it's such a full circle moment to have them here today and to talk together and to share their journeys with you all. So first, to my right, I have Kendra Jayne Patrick, who's the owner and director of Gallery Kendra Jayne Patrick. The gallery is based in Switzerland and operates between Switzerland and the US and specializes in 21st century avant-garde art. And then to Kendra's right, we have Gabrielle C. Wilson. She is counsel in Philip Neiser LLP's litigation practice. Gabrielle advises clients in the creative industries, including artists, collectors, galleries, and institutions on matters involving copyright, trademark, art restitution, cultural property, and complex commercial disputes. So these are some powerhouse women we have here. And to start off Art Week, it's so lovely to be able to focus the podcast on this topic, which is so near and dear to my own heart, as I'm also an art and intellectual property attorney. So this is something that I've always loved. So I'm so grateful that Kendra and Gabby are here to speak with us. So normally I start the podcast off with the question of origin stories. Where are you and your people from? But for this special episode, I want to start with when you first connected with art. What was your first encounter with art? And anyone can start.
Do you mean kind of first encounter ever, or do you mean like the encounter?
Whichever
the
way
art encounter. I don't know. I mean, I think, I'm from Cleveland, and I think I definitely grew up like, my parents, wanted us around the arts. So we went to the Cleveland Orchestra, we go to the art museum. Especially when I got older, I could see kind of like, all the Black people I knew, or like a lot of them had like a Romario Bearden print, or they had the Eddie Barnes like Sugar Shake, right, which is that juke joint kind of painting that's like, I feel like so many people had that as a print. But I think the moment for me, like the moment when art became something I wanted to spend my life on, it was I graduated law school, didn't like it, was kind of bopping around New York for a bit. I had an internship at a fashion photography agency. There's like two major ones, and I was an art partner. And I liked it, I thought it was cool. But then I was interning at a fashion and art magazine. And they were sort of working things out, and they were like, oh, can you write about art for the magazine blog? And I did it. I went to a show. I got to kind of pick the gallery, the artist, and I was like, this is it. Like, it's art, because it's like you get the intellectual rigor that you have, right, as a lawyer, in my case, right, as a law student. But then you get to really traffic in aesthetics, and they're equally important. So I would say that moment, being asked to blog for an art magazine was my moment.
I would say first encounter, I'd have to go like way, way back to when I was young. I went to grade school and high school that was like really focused in the arts. And there I did all types of arts. I danced, did painting, sculpture, drawing, musical theater, like literally everything. I was just trying to taste everything and do everything. And that's really kind of what spurred my interest in the arts. And then since then, I've always danced. I danced professionally when I was younger. I was part of a college dance group. I danced even during law school. I was part of a dance company. Wow. And I really just love the arts. And I've always taken visual arts classes, mainly in figurative ceramic sculpture. That's like my favorite thing to do.
I love ceramics, so seeing the ceramics in this space is just really fun too. But Kendra, I'm going to start with you. I'm really fascinated by your journey. You went from law school to then eventually opening up your own eponymous gallery. Can you give us more insight into your journey and why you decided to become a gallerist, coming from the legal world?
Yeah. Well, I think at that moment where I was writing, I kind of felt like it needed to be almost more expansive than that. So what I did is I would ask like any artist that I spoke with if they knew someone who would also want me to write for them. And so I was able to take the old analysis skills, and kind of apply them to like a painting, right, in order to sort of determine like, what does that artist want? Is this even a relevant gesture, and is the art what it says it is, And so I think I really liked thinking about that. And then I worked at an artist-run space for a bit, which New York is like pretty notorious for having great artist-run spaces. And so I worked for an artist-run space. I kind of just was the only non-artist, so I kind of was able to finagle my way into curating that way. Like I set the schedule. I did NADA New York, which is one of the fairs coming up next week. We did NADA. And then I think, after about 2 years, it felt like I had something to say, and I had an idea of like how to put shows together, where to look. And so then at the end of 2016, I kind of said, I want to do my own thing. And sort of after it was like, okay, I want to figure this out, then you have like the harsh reality of New York rent, and it was like, okay,
so real.
okay, how am I going to do this?
Right.
Like, it's such an expensive business in general, how am I going to do this? And it was really, I have to say, serendipitous. I met this collector when I was at the artist run space, and I kind of went to him, we stayed in touch. I went to him at some point, like in 2017, right, early 2018, and we are at Bortolami Gallery, a fantastic gallerist, and we're there, and he says to Stefania, Stefania at Bortolami, she owns the gallery. He says to her, here's Kendra, she wants to have a gallery. And Stefania goes, oh, why don't you do something in my viewing room? And it was like, right, she's a very prominent gallerist. She just moved to this big Tribeca space.
Wow.
Yeah, and so she gave me the viewing room. So I'm like, no way. So I call her 2 days later. And I'm like, are you for real? Like, can I do something? And she goes, yes, but remember, this is going to be your gallery. So you're not curating a show for me. Right, I want you to show the people who come in here what you're gonna do. And I was kind of able to parlay that into just a few more opportunities. So it was running right as a gallery at artist. Pandemic, my Swiss partner and I moved to Switzerland, hemmed and hawed kind of about coming back to New York and where I was itinerant, right? So figuring out where the permanent space was going to be. And then we sort of were like, all right, we can just do this in Switzerland where we are. So my first brick and mortar if I started the program in 2018, the first brick and mortar was the end of 2022. And actually with one of the artists I'm showing at Independent next week, she kind of opened the gallery space, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's so rare to see somebody go from law school directly into the art world.
I know.
Without any legal position. It's just
Were you involved in
a regular.
I was not.
Oh, okay.
No.
Yeah.
No. It was sort of like a thing where you're like, if it's right, this is where all my skills can kind of culminate to something that makes sense. Yeah.
And Gabby, I want to go to you next because you have such a specific career as well that's also rare for lawyers. You've worked in cultural heritage properties and art law for the majority of your legal career, which is a rare feat, as I said, to specialize in such a niche area, even directly out of law school. Can you talk about what sparked your interest in this area and how you got involved, how you got your first position?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, when I went to law school, I definitely saw the arts and law as being two separate entities. I went to law school thinking I love reading and writing, I love analytical thinking and all that, and so I'm going to be a lawyer. And on the side, I'm going to continue to do my arts, dance, and all that. But when I got to law school, and in Cardozo in particular, I realized oh wait, I can actually do both of these things together at the same time. And I got involved in an art law clinic there, and so I interned at Alvin Ailey Dance Foundation for a
What an
semester.
institution.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had a great professor, and who was like an art lawyer, and she ran the seminar, and so I was like, oh wow, like I want to do this. Like I want to kind of meld my interests into one and be able to do that. So, but when I started at my first firm, I actually was doing general commercial litigation, and I still do a lot of litigation now, but it's more focused now in the arts and in IP. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And this conversation is, the way that I thought about it was, I started the podcast back in December 2020, and so it was a time when people weren't really having events, and I actually started this as a gathering, doing brunches and dinners in the city. That was January, February, and then of course I had to pivot. And so over time, as I started practicing, it's like, dang, I want to bring this back, this creative outlet. And then I've been getting more into the art world. So I was like, all right, now how do I meld these two things together? And that's why I brought this conversation for Art Week, because it inspired me. So a lot of questions that I get normally about from other lawyers specifically, and just professionals in general, who are like, how do you have time to do all this stuff?
Yeah.
So where are some of your favorite places to check out art, and what literature resources do you get into to indulge in the art world? Like, what can you share with our audience of how to just tap in?
I feel like these days there's so much information online. Like everything is at your fingertips.
Yeah.
Right.
I also find like Instagram is like a great place to just like, even from your home, like if you don't even want to go anywhere, Instagram is a great place to like look up artists. They all have their own, handles with and they show them their art on Instagram. Art fairs are really great places to look for art. Museums. I mean, there's so many places, and we live in New York City, so it's like Mecca.
Right. Yeah.
And also studio visits too are great.
I was gonna say like 80 or 90% of the art business is actually here.
Yeah.
In New York.
Right.
Just internationally, like most of the art business is here.
Yeah, and go with friends. I always find it's fun. Like, if you're just looking for something to do on like a Saturday, just, take a friend, go see some art, go get brunch. Gotta involve food in there.
Yeah, for sure.
Going with me.
You don't have to tell me twice on that one. And then, because the podcast is focused on Black women and Black women in law, I wanted to focus the conversation as well on Black women collecting art. So for those who want to become patrons of the art, etc., what advice do you have for them in starting an art collection? Like what considerations should people have top of mind from your perspective?
I mean, I think because I think she's right. It's like you just go to things, like just go and go and go. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of really starting an art collection, I feel like the baseline is, what do you like? Mm-hmm. Figure out literally what do you like, because I think the art business of the last 40 years and certainly the last 15 has been absolute frenzy, right? Like the younger the artist, the higher the prices, the auction houses, and there's a saying that people have is that you want to collect with your eyes and not your ears. And so I think that in the very beginning, like, do you like painting? Do you like sculpture? Do you like, just work those things out? And then I would say on going to things, I think a really good guide, because what I would say is there's like, in a certain way, let's call it like 2 conversations, right? About art. I think there's like a really informal, art market where like some of this gallery, like it's local, the artist is looking to, to make money from their career, live off of it. But it's the sort of conversation of, say, if you go to the fairs next week, there may or may not be overlap there. So I think I would say, and I think it's great to be involved in both of those, to be involved locally, to be involved internationally. But I think going to fairs the big fairs, gives you a sense of like who's in the like quote unquote capital C, capital A contemporary art market. So I think just the art, and art fairs can be overwhelming. It's so much art. It's so much art.
So many this week, literally every day.
And there's like 7 fairs this week. It is like so much art, But I was just saying that I think what I would do is come to see me in Independent.
Yes.
I think with Independent, I love that. I mean, it's my first time doing the fair, and frankly, it's like a big honor. It's like New York's only invite-only fair.
Wow.
The big fair of the week is Freeze, but Freeze I feel like is really focused on the blue chips, right? The big kind of giant money galleries. So I would say come to Independent, where like in terms of like price range, where they are in the market, emerging mid-career, Independent's very good. But then I would also say that go to NADA. Make sure you go to NADA. It is just where it is the best fair to me to start collecting at. Works I feel like can go from like $1,000 up.
Right.
And I think also it's nice when you start out to sort of build up to how much you wanna spend, on a piece of art. So I think, and then that will also like, then you see those artists, you're on the Instagram, you see other artists, right, that are related to that conversation.
And the community just follows
Their
you.
community, what are the galleries that follow them, who do they show with, so I think, that really initial research led by like your art fantasy is what I would say is a good way to start,
And Gabby, how about you?
I would say just to add to that in terms of, you also have to think about finances. How much do you want to devote to this? Speak to your advisors if you have them, and they'll tell you if you can, what your budget should be. Because I think obviously even with any shopping and making any purchase, you want to make sure that you're can afford it. That's like the main thing. And I think over time, like gradually, you buy a thing here, you buy a thing here, buy a thing here, and then you start to build probably slowly in the beginning.
I think so. And also I would say like, I feel like there is so much, and I feel like there are like certain aspects of like the entertainment world or something that have come to the art world to make money. And I just think that's like not a great premise, honestly. And it isn't because certain art can't make you money, but it's because frankly a lot of art is like a car, like you buy it from the fair, and it's
There's
really
no guarantee.
It's a vendor good. Exactly. There's no guarantee, and I just feel like sometimes I meet people who are new to collecting, and it just becomes like, what should I buy? What should I buy right now? And then you end up spending too much money.
I would think like this is not a great analogy, like buying a piece of furniture. It's like, is it something you want to live with? And you're not necessarily going to think like that couch is going to be worth anything like years from now.
But completely.
But it's like,
forever?
Is it your like something that you want to be around all the time? Buy, have it be part of your legacy, carried on to your kids. Like I think it's more that feeling behind it than the monetary aspect of it. I just bring the monetary in terms of like you have to purchase it. Obviously, that's part of it. So that needs money. You need to use that.
And I want to pull on that string of legacy, especially in Black communities. That's kind of like top of mind for a lot of things because our cultural aspects feel so ephemeral at points where it's like we are always constantly trying to grasp it, and when we do, we want to hold on to it and be able to pass it down to future generations. So can you talk about, Gabby, in terms of stewarding an art collection, what are some tips that you can share from a legal perspective that are important to maybe consider in that legacy but also protecting yourself?
I think in terms of purchasing art, make sure you're papering everything. I think documentation is like very important with respect to that aspect because you want to make sure that you're getting, warranties of title, warranties of authenticity. You want to make sure you have records for those, like if you want to sell later on. I think though, just really documenting everything is really important. Also, for, I guess, in terms of legacy, doing some like estate planning, taxes, talking to lawyers about, what happens to the works when you die. Are they going to be gifted? Are they going to be transferred to your heirs, or what your plan is? Especially if you have a large amount of works, like those things become more important in terms of like building your legacy from like a legal perspective.
The other thing I've noticed is I have some clients with like giant collections, and their kids are like, I can't even, so your kids,
it's their parents' stuff.
Yes,
your exactly. So it's like, they might not want to have your, 8,000 square foot storage facility, with all this art that they don't necessarily care about. And I would also say something interesting that's happened, right, as like millennials and Gen Z start to spend money on art,
Right.
is like it's sometimes a different categorization, like it's like, collectibles are up in a different way. Like it was kind of famously, right, like Drake bought Tupac's ring at Sotheby's last year, 2 years ago, something like that, And so those things are important, right? And so I think the broader collectibles market, I think, is shaping the art market.
Like that ephemera.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's like just a thing when you think about collecting to just be on top of, and then just get real about. I would say also, just kind of be real about like, do you want to live with it? Some people only want enough art for their walls. Then I know people remodeling for more walls, for literally for more walls for the art. Yeah, for real. So I think I would add those into these considerations.
Yeah. And kind of on that note about legacy, both of you, what are your thoughts about collective ownership of works? Because that's something that's been a major topic, going back to finances and money. And sometimes it's easier to just pull your resources together, but then there's a question of who actually can own this and pass it down, and what happens with that work eventually. What are your thoughts, just kind of from a high level, about collective ownership?
But I wanted to add one more thing,
Sure.
just about the money. It's like,
Of course. Money is a big topic in art.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a big topic,
Yeah.
and it's like I feel like you're right to say documentation. Read over those invoices, right? Like a lot of times, like we have a clause too, right, that says like, we'd ask for the right of first refusal, right? If you want to sell the works, that it's 5 years until you put them up for auction. Some collectors balk at this. I've definitely gotten yelled at for having to send an invoice and you relent. But so I really changed the language to say, like, as a courtesy to the longevity of our artists' careers, do not put this 26-year-old at auction, because you paid too much money for somebody who didn't have a solo show, and you failed to verify
the market.
And some
And those resale restrictions we're seeing more and more.
right?
Exactly. Because I think there's a movement to, bring it back to the artists, people who are the lifeblood of this market.
Completely.
And really trying to protect them.
Yeah.
So the question of collective ownership, is it something that makes sense? What are your opinions about that piece of things?
I think I guess there are, I'm trying to now think of the masterworks. Like that's like the fractional ownership, that kind of model. There are like different models that are coming out that seem to be working. I mean, they're out there. People are using them. I think you lose the idea we're talking about of having living with the work and having it on your wall and having that experience with it. But I think models where, maybe it's collective ownership and it's somewhere in a museum or some kind of facility that everyone can enjoy it. I see that as probably being a model that would be workable, that might be of interest to people. Yeah. Are there any models that you know about charity that are?
Well, I was thinking because, and kind of keeping the theme of Blackness and all, more indigenous models like a susu or something where people kind of pass around a savings pot of money, and maybe it goes to one person for one specific thing, and maybe art could be one of those things that people kind of contribute to, and this is just a very generalized way of explaining it, but there's something to be said about using your resources together, because I mean, people in the past, like our ancestors, they were getting things that now we look at it and we're like, how did they do that? And it was collectivity and community and working together. And nowadays we're just rebranding those things with kind of like a more capitalist perspective with a different name, but essentially it's that model. And so how do we look at these things? And then from the legal perspective, how does it actually work? And I think the legality is sometimes complicated a little, and it takes it from its original source, but I wonder if there is a way that they can go hand in hand. So
yeah, I think it's the fractional ownership bit that kind of complicates things. It's like anytime when multiple people are owning anything, there's always, if you have a difference of opinion, I wanted to go here, I want to do this with it, I want to do, it's like, how do you make those decisions? How do you decide, okay, say someone who owns it dies, does like their portion go to their heirs, or does it now go back to the collective? I mean, there's like all these issues that you have to try to figure out as like, okay, now we all own it together. Now, how are we owning it together? That's not just like straightforward. You have to figure out those things, make those terms. And then even when you make the terms, there's maybe something you haven't thought about, and it comes up, and now what do you do? Are you in a dispute? How are you solving the dispute? Who gets to decide? Are you going to do a vote? Like, there's all these issues that probably come up in trying to determine like what to do when you're in a situation where you're owning things together. I mean, you see it even with the kids and families. Like, the parents die and 4 kids own the place, and it's like, things run amok. They're fighting over who gets this and who gets that. And that's only 4 people. I mean, collectives could be even more and more people. Not to say it wouldn't work, but I think it's a lot of negotiating beforehand as to how it's going to work that needs to happen.
And something like, Masterworks, for example, or these other ones, I would say, in a certain way, like, I have kind of been like, to those things admittedly, but I know that people do them. I think it makes sense when you're like, let me have a 29th of like something giant, like, whatever, like a Rubens or, something like that. And so I think it can be more transactional. I'm sure those like contracts are serious. I'm sure they're very serious. Airtight. Yeah, I would assume they
should be airtight.
It should be. Yeah.
But it's also when it's a new thing. It's like hard to know if it's airtight because sometimes you don't anticipate all of the issues that can come up.
Yeah,
that's a very good point.
Yeah.
And then I guess you guys kind of touched on this already, but I wanted to go back to this question of what are some important considerations for Black professionals maybe to keep in mind when curating a collection or thinking about what kind of impacts they want to have on the art market?
I don't know. I think about impact. I mean, it's interesting. I feel like my inclination is to start with a bit of like controversy that has been kind of going on in the art world. I think about just about kind of like the relationship between collectors and museums, and that this has always been a thing, right? There's like a giant article in the Times about it, I think from last week, that ArtNet covered that. But I think, when you talk about like influence, it is, these boards, kind of matter, because inevitably people want to show things, right, that make their collection look good. I would say something to look into, right, if you're ready to spend money, right, as a board member, is the Black Trustee Alliance. It's run by Victoria Rogers. She's a young collector, and she is the son of Desiree Waters, excuse me, the daughter of Desiree and, why am I forgetting this man's name? But they own Ariel Investment. And so like I think Victoria is like really into it, and she's into art, and so she started the Black Trustee Alliance, right? They just had a meeting in LA. And so I think that's if you want to be involved with that aspect of the museum, which is quite powerful, you know? I think that's great, because the other thing is like you want Black people on these boards, you know, to be making these decisions, and they can often be like extremely powerful people, right? Like whether you're talking about Warren Kanders or Leon Black, right? People who have Melody Hobson, right? You know, so you're with these extremely powerful people who have these really specific interests, and I think that something like what Victoria is organizing, I think is really great, and it's a way to get involved at that level when you think about like legacy.
Before I pivot away from the art combo, I wanted to ask you, Kendra, are there certain kinds of artists that you recommend keeping an eye on when developing a collection?
As in like right now?
Any?
Like just... Yeah, I think... I mean, that's why I say go to the art fairs,
right?
You know, because then you'll just have a sense of like who is what and where. But I think kind of just what we talked about earlier, just really, really decide, stick to your guns, don't be afraid to say like, oh God, I spent that money on that, that sucks. And you know, like I think it's like fine to kind of to say that. But yeah, I just think in general, yeah, I think starting with the artists that you see represented. And listen to the podcast. ArtNet has a great podcast. The Art Conversation's a little boring, but it's good. The Art Newspaper has a podcast. So I would say those just are great places to figure out, like, to start, to really start to think about artists. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I feel like it's so personal, right? And like even to try to recommend things, it's like hard because you want people kind of have to connect with it themselves, right? Did you have that feeling?
For sure. And yeah, when people come to my booth, right, or they ask me kind of like, what's the art about? My first question is like, you know, what do you like about it? What do you see? What do you notice, right? And then that's a good place to start a conversation, I find.
To get them into it, interacting more with it.
Yeah, and there's people like, you know, Stefania, who I mentioned earlier, like she gave me some early advice. She's like, you know, you want to be on the same side of the painting, right? As the collector with whom you're working. So I think that is the other thing is, look for, I mean, art fair's very busy, right? But I think, you want to really be able to, the extent you can, like have like a conversation with the gallerist about what you like and what you see, and that's usually a good way to start it. You know, maybe you like it, maybe you heard about it and you like it less. Like all those are possibilities.
I don't know if I can ask a question.
Yeah, go for it.
But like in terms of aesthetics, like how would you recommend for people to kind of like pull the trigger on something? Like, you know, what should be like the thought process? Like, oh yeah, that's the one, or that's it, or, you know, do you have any advice for that? Like,
I think, I think maybe it's good to examine the artist's whole practice is maybe what I would say, you know, and I think, you know, if you're looking at the whole practice, maybe you see something at art fair, maybe you go to a gallery show a few months later. I think that being familiar with their whole practice, I think gives you an idea of like, do you want to pull the trigger? Do you want to make your personal, right, your emotional, right, your wall space investment? Yeah.
These are amazing insights. Thank you so much for this conversation. So pivoting away and back to the Sistahs-in-Law theme, I always like to end the podcast with this final question. So I want to open up to the audience too and give time for Q&A. But I ask, who is your sister-in-law? And this can be anyone that you admire, a mentor, a peer, or a colleague in the legal field that you like to shout out. And it could be a celebrity attorney, who knows? It could be a fictional, whoever you want to shout out.
There's so many people I can shout out. I can't like just do one person, but two of my best friends are lawyers. Shout out to Chantel Waters Rogers and Davion Chisholm. And also too, I have to shout out the people who like helped me in the beginning of my career. Chantel Carter and Lisa Marie Collins. When I was an associate, they really, you know, showed me the ropes, and I got to shout out to them.
Yes, I love that.
There are probably more people. When I find them, I hang on to them. Charity, you're one of them. You know.
I love to be your sister.
Exactly.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't really know any women like kind of practicing and working in law.
Maybe they're not practicing anymore.
Yeah.
Exactly. But but there's
The two people I shouted out, they're not practicing anymore.
They're not practicing.
But they're lawyers.
Yeah.
Once you get that law degree, you know.
Yeah, it's true.
Once a lawyer,
it's
always
true.
a
Yeah,
lawyer.
that's Just, you're in it.
Okay, I cannot come up with any off the top of my head, but what I can say is that there are like some really wonderful Black women too that I would have my eye on. I was just talking with a newly discovered Spelman sister. About Kimberly Purtle, another Spelman sister. She is the first Black auctioneer at Sotheby's.
Wow.
Love Kimberly, she's great. Yeah. Nicola Vassell, right? Kind of a legendary gallerist, first Black woman with a big Chelsea galleries. There's Ebony Haynes down at 52 Walker, right? Doing conceptual art.
Right.
Really hard. There's Joanna Jack Shaman. There's Ashley Gagosian. There's like these really wonderful Black women in these programs, and I think it's great because we're all doing different things. You know, Kimberly, who I just talked about, like she was in fashion.
Right.
You know, and so I do think that there's just like a variety of Black women, right, who can introduce you in all of our really different ways around art. My friend Kyla McMillan, Kyla is now the director of the Armory Show. I've joined that selection committee because I really believe in her new vision for the art fair. There's 154, it's run by a Black woman. So there's just a lot of Black women to look to and follow in the art world, which is really great.
Yeah. You brought us full circle with the Black women in art. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I would do. Yeah, those women are great.
And so where can the people find you? Where can the audience follow your journey, and wherever you'd publicly like to allow them to follow you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram.
Awesome.
Instagram is the main one, and I did want to say it's really important to me, right? Just like having Black women in the collecting space,
Yes.
And so please ask me anything because it can really be a place where you do need to be like ushered in, as it were, for reasons good and bad, you know. So don't hesitate to reach out. Right, I've invited Charity for Independent the Welcome Breakfast, which is like
So
good.
excited for
It's
that.
gonna be good, but it's like super VIP, you know. And so like getting to know me, getting to know other women, like we really like to look out, right, for other Black women. So for those things, passes, etc. And I have kind of an unlimited number of passes for the public days at Independent, so I can maybe send you the link and you can blast the link.
Sure.
And the public days are the 9th through the 11th. But I would say don't be afraid of like speaking to Black women who you see at these booths, because I think we all want to encourage, right, like more Black women to pull the trigger.
Yeah, well, on that note, thank you ladies for joining me for this first live podcast recording.
Thank you,
So
Charity.
good. Yeah,
Kudos
thank
to
you.
you.
Thank you.